wait till it starts talking in the middle of the meeting.
Okay, welcome everybody. This is the council workshop. We have one item up here called climate policy and staffing. We have a group of leaders. I'm going to call them the dream team, who's going to lead us through here. I'm assuming, Derek, you're going to kick us off? Okay.
So thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As the President noted, we're here to talk about climate policy and staffing. This is going to be a tag team presentation in two different parts. So the first part is this evening's workshop. The goal tonight is to talk through some current climate initiatives, and then after the directors have given their presentations, we'll have some time for question and answer. Then coming up this Friday, February 4th, we have our annual council retreat, and on that agenda in the afternoon includes climate, and that will be a good opportunity for the council to provide direction as well as discuss next steps. The three departments giving presentations this evening include our Parks and Recreation Department, Economic and Community Development Department, and Public Works Department, which are the three departments that have the greatest roles to play on climate policy issues, although of course climate policy touches all of our operations. In recent months, we've heard from council members about a handful of climate-related topics: hybrid and electric vehicles, street materials, solar panels, tree counts, pollinator gardens, and citywide coordination of climate initiatives, aka staffing. So as you listen to the directors this evening, you'll hear all of those topics woven through and a lot more. So I'm going to turn it over to our first director, and then I'll come up at the end and tee up Friday's discussion. So, Julie.
All right. Good evening, Mayor, Council President, and Council. For those who are watching, I'm Julie Parascondola, Kent Parks Director, and I'm actually really happy to be here today. This is a topic we don't really talk about very often, and I think a lot of times we're just doers, and we do, and we don't take a minute to just share all the great things. So thank you for the opportunity to talk here today. I think you'll see with both all of myself and my colleagues, we are doing a ton of stuff in this area on what we're talking about today. So in parks, we do break out our sustainability initiatives by topic. And they mostly do align with King County's Climate Action Plan, but they also align with our National Parks and Recreation Association. There's a lot of things in Parks and Recreation that are different than just worrying about renewable energies and things like that. So we're a little bit broader and we break them up into categories. So really just a first point of context, the mission of Kent Parks, and simply by nature of what we do as a function in our department, we definitely consider ourselves leaders in climate resiliency and sustainability, not just here in Kent, but obviously across the state and the nation because of what we manage as a department and how we're moving forward. Also, as you know, the Parks Department's been working towards national accreditation now for quite a few years. There's three very direct built-in standards that we have to meet in order to achieve accreditation. The first one is actually having a departmental environmental policy and program, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. The second one is a natural resource plan and procedures. We have that in our Green Kent plan. We have individualized resource management plans, and we're very close to finishing our parks urban forestry plan, which I'll talk about here. And then finally, the next standard is about recycling and waste, and it's really about diversion of the waste stream, which we'll talk about in a category. So these are very direct things that have already been on our radar. I already have budgeted that I'm working on, and so I'll talk a little bit about that. You also know we've done we're working on our facilities master plan. We did the golf plan, we did the rec plan, and we did the park and open space plan, right? And so we have a ton of plans, and all of those have individualized strategies also around environments and programming and things like that. So in parks, we do have in the adopted 22 budget, we are working on a departmental sustainability plan to really help us pull all those centralized ideas into one area and really give a little bit better direction in what return is, what performance measures we should be looking at, and so on. Anything we build in parks will obviously roll to any kind of city planning or King County planning as applicable. So going into some of our buckets, one of the first areas that we look at is our natural lands. There's a lot to do on natural land management and green infrastructure. I'm not going to go through every one of these lists because they gave us a time limit, darn it. But if you see anything on here, be happy to bring it back, talk about it later, even in Parks and Human Services Committee and whatever. So a couple things I did want to highlight. The first one is our trees. Parks has made an extreme effort to really focus on our parks trees because we have a lot. We use our tree keeper software. We have about 7,000 trees inventoried in there now. That software is very powerful, and I think you've seen some sneak peeks of it where you can look at tree health, pest management on it, size, all that good stuff. And so we're working through that. Very aggressively working on rain gardens and water conservation practices. We just have to remind ourselves the Kent Park system really hasn't had a lot of capital reinvestments, so some of them are decades old. Some of these new trends have been coming, and we're catching up. So every time Terry or anybody's up here talking about park projects, trust me, they're going to have a ton of ecological things to it. We have 2 rain gardens in our system now, which is at Turnkey Park and Neely Soames, but we definitely have ideas of where we're going to be putting them in other future parks as we develop. We do use green, environmentally friendly chemicals where we can in parks. There is sometimes we have to use a little bit more aggressive chemicals in showers, restrooms, things like that because we have to. But we try to use green chemicals where we can. We are very sensitive about pesticides in parks. We have to use them, we continue to use them, but we are exploring ideas of potentially considering pesticide-free parks. Some of our colleagues across the state have tried that. You have to have community tolerance because you have to run through grass that's got weeds and things like that. And we just did a survey, which I'll talk to you about here towards the end, and our community likes a little bit more developed grass, which I just found out. So these are those kind of opportunity areas we can talk about. The other thing is water conservation. I'm not sure if you all know, but we use a centralized system called CalSense. It's one of the national products out there. We have 17 of our major park sites on that, and it's very sophisticated. It's all electronic. It sends alerts to your phone. How many times have we driven by a street and we've seen like an irrigation head and water's just like shooting up and wasting, right? We get alerts on those kind of things. The system manages flow, so how much water saturation is coming into the turf, so we can immediately adjust it. And it also uses evapotranspiration, so it understands rain and saturation at the same time. So it's almost like we don't even do anything, it manages it by itself, but we track water conservation and how much we can save by shutting off irrigation zones and things like that. Reducing landfill waste, this is the challenge. Probably if I had to pick one of my areas, this is one of my hardest. And this is really not eliminating waste because we do have to go to the landfills at times, but how can we divert or do things differently? In parks, we compost as much as we can right back into the landscapes if we can. We definitely are looking at reducing, water bottles and things in our parks. So I'm sure you've seen we have water bottle fillers, now, and trying to reduce some of that. We do recycle at all of our large community events. We recycle in all city facilities. What we don't do is recycle in general parks, and it's an extreme challenge, because, especially in a community that's as diverse culturally as us, is trying to understand what's recyclable, what's not. It's a huge challenge, and our profession has continually tried to work through it, test it, and we're kind of moving through there. The other thing that we're exploring right now is a product called Maxi Cans, where garbage collection is a challenge, and these cans go way deep down into the ground and they automatically compact while you're going, so you don't have to visit trips as often for garbage and reducing emissions on your drive times, because garbage collection throughout the city is a constant drive, and that's carbon emissions on vehicles. So we've got a lot of activity happening in here, but it definitely is one of the most challenging areas for us. Environmentally friendly building practices, just a reminder, we have 28 city facilities, about 400,000 square feet of space, and we have been focusing very aggressively on LED lighting conversions. They've been way more life cycle, a lot more energy efficient. Over the last 5 years, we've replaced anywhere from 3,500 to 4,000 light fixtures in the city. Our Parks Department has replaced all of our athletic complexes with LED lighting. Our parking lots also has a lot of paths and trailway lighting, and then we even had some more scheduled this year as well. We already look at low flow water features and faucets in our restrooms and so on. One of the challenges, we continue to explore it, it's a challenge, is waterless urinals. Not going to get all gross, but you got to have something to be able to flush, and so it's been a challenge in parks. We have tested it, but we are continually trying to look at that. We do use green and friendly chemicals in our facilities with our custodian teams, except for showers and restrooms. We need a little bit more aggressive chemical there. We do have centralized irrigation or centralized HVAC systems here, so we can increase or decrease power consumption and heat depending on what temperatures are doing out in the community. Facilities also is responsible for managing all city utility accounts. They're not the provider. We have all the accounts. We manage over 400 utility accounts with that span over 6 different providers, and so a lot of stuff happening in this particular space too. And as part of the facilities master plan, we actually did an energy audit on every single one of our facilities. And you'll hear more about that as a council when we come present that. And you can see the little cheat sheet chart there. We do know who our power users are, which as you can see is City Hall. So there you go. But lots of great stuff there. Looking at renewable energy sources and green equipment, this is kind of a cool, fun area. Happy to say we are working on a solar panel project at the senior center right now. It's got a beautiful roof and it has conducive. It's just important to understand the cost versus benefit ratio on those. So a perfect example is the senior center spends $40,000 a year on power to power the place up. It's about $80,000 to install all the solar panel units. To get a real return on investment pure, that's 18 years in order to see the return. However, what's benefit is we can get grants that will buy that down and bring that faster. So we're working on that now. The energy grants are due this year for 22, and so we're hoping to get offset where we can get grants for at least 50% that will shorten the return on utility savings. And so we're pretty excited. We're going to see what do we think. Is this something that might be feasible for the rest, not the rest of the facilities, but those that are applicable? So very excited for that. I'll let Chad talk about fuel efficient vehicles, but we do just at the golf course, we have a whole fleet of, not an entire fleet, but a large percentage of electric vehicles. Anywhere we can, we switch to electric if we possible. We've done that with different types of, weed eaters, blowers, hand blowers, all are electric versus gas, so we don't do the carbon emission side on the gas output. We currently have right now in parks only one area that has electric vehicle charging stations, which is Morrow Meadows. So we definitely are looking at that where it might be applicable. And then we are installing a new electric vehicle charging station at the first floor where the motor pool is. So we definitely are doing that, and that is this year. So that's happening this year. And then just a reminder, in 2018, the City Council allowed us to buy into the Green Direct Energy Program. That's where we commit to 1% of our use coming from renewable energy. So I was like, oh, it's been a while since I've looked at that. It actually started in 2021. So we booked it early, but it didn't actually start till 2021. Ends in 2035. I pulled up one of our accounts just to see what was happening on about a $250 bill on one account. And again, remember we have 400. Only 82 are in this program. We saved $4. We got a credit for $4. And so what we haven't done, because we've just been buried in COVID and other things, is really analyze what that is. A lot of the utility companies have been holding price increases, so it's a little hard right now. But more information to come on that. I just wanted to remind you we are committed to that as well in ours. Pollinator gardens, I think we're all going to talk about this because the decline of pollinators, especially the honeybee, is almost catastrophic. And I remember doing a paper on this in college, so very difficult. We have just started. We have some informal Springwood Park and Clark Lake just by nature of the plants we planted, or we've purposely scattered seed. The real formal garden we just put in is out of West Fenwick, and that is a very specific strategy to attract pollinators of all different kinds to go out and repollinate and focus on a bunch of things. So we're probably all going to talk about pollinators because it's super important, but any park we now build from here forward or renovate is going to have some type of elements that you can see here. And then one more topic, and I'll pass it on, is public engagement and educational programming. Lucky us, we're also the recreation division, so we do a lot of programming, and nature-based environmental programming was ranked in the top 5 by our community of wanting more opportunities in this area. So Lori and her team are exploring when we can feasibly do that. Also in the recent Park and Open Space Plans survey that we just did that you're going to hear more about on the 15th, we tested some of these strategies with the community. The community's top 5 that they're willing to, support or, not scream and holler at us. One, they think we need to be focusing on invasive species management. We do too. Two, they want us to do more increased of native plants. Three, pollinator gardens resonated with our community. And number four is educational programs. So again, they're asking to be educated as well as we do some of these practices. The last on the list, like I said, is they don't want us to let the grasses grow. We have strategy in our parks. If you don't walk on it, you can let the grass grow and kind of meadowize. Yeah, they weren't really fans of that. So we'll have to kind of work through that. But that's just, to me, an education of what can we do and why do we do something like that. So there's a lot of things that we're exploring on how can we educate with signage in our parks, on kiosks, or even on plants that are native plants, which are pretty cool. How do we work with our youth in our communities and understanding some of this stuff? So tons of opportunity in this particular category. So what's next for Kent Parks? As I mentioned, I already had this plan in the budget. We are working on our own kind of sustainability plan where it'll kind of look at all of our carbon footprint in parks, which we've already started. Inventory of our sustainability practices and what are our guiding plans and goals and so on. So that's done. Or we are going to be working on that. We are almost finished moving forward with the master plan and condition assessment. More information will be coming soon on that. And that's a lot of energy stuff in there. We've been working over the past year and a half on our urban forestry plan, and that is almost finished. I just got the final draft. We are looking at launching social media campaigns. It's always been in the works. We've just been buried with other stuff on environmental and what's our environmental story. I mean, sharing what we just shared today, we don't even really share that with the community. We just do it. And so how do we make sure people know how great we are advancing some of these things? Looking at nature-based programming, as I mentioned, the feasibility study and the solar panel, all of our CIP projects, whether they're facilities or parks that you approved already in the budget, have environmental issues or ecosystem things in there that we're advancing. So you've already kind of approved that unknowingly. That's in there as practice. And then we definitely are going to be going on aggressive grant funding with ARPA and some of the infrastructure funding that's coming out of the federal government and go from there. And then, of course, depending on what more information, I'm happy, I could talk for days on this, so anything that you have thing you want us to build or talk to later. So that's it for my part. So I'm going to pass it off to Kurt. Now I can take a breath.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor, Council President, members of Council. Appreciate the opportunity. My name is Kurt Hanson. I'm Director of Economic Community Development. So I'm suddenly very aware of how we built this presentation. You guys are going to get a little bit of policy whiplash here because you heard some very department-specific implementation steps. You're going to hear the same from Public Works. You'll hear it from me too, but I'm going to zoom us back out again and start looking at a little bit of the regional participation we have in the climate policy level. So bear with me, it's going to make sense because I'm going to zoom back in. We're going to talk about where all of the policies that we administer, the regulations, everything is really housed in, how about all my land use and planning board alum here, in the comprehensive plan. So we're going to get back to that as the sort of parent document for all of what we do in the city. So with that, at the regional level, the King County Cities Climate Collaboration, or K4C, it's been around for about 10 years. City of Kent joined in the summer, I think, of 2018, and we staffed that in ECD. Used to be Danielle Butzik, if you remember. Danielle was just heavily invested on a personal level in this as an initiative, and actually really kind of drug us along and got us to pony up and actually join and start committing at the K4C level. So Danielle was really the ignition source for how the city got involved in this in the beginning. Danielle has moved on, but Haley, of course, took up the baton there, and while she's out on maternity leave, Kayleen Nobis in our office, also in long-range planning, is kind of staffing the monthly meetings. Obviously, I know a lot of council members are also attending when they can. In fact, Councilmember Core, I think maybe last week you are now elected as the community outreach, or the elected outreach committee member. Was that last week?
No, I've been there for a month.
For a month, a long month. So congrats and thank you for representing Kent on that one. So a little bit about K4C. The group aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by the year 2050. So the way that they're doing that is through what they're calling the Joint Climate Action Commitments. You can see those in green there. They focus on mainly 5 categories. As you can see, land use is only one of those topics. In the commitment level, I mentioned Kent staffing from this group is land use staff. So we're not exactly equipped to, I'll just say, step up in a holistic way because of the diversity and kind of the disciplines involved in all of those categories. At K4C, this year's funding has not been voted on. As far as I know, Councilmember Corr, that is true. But the only item at the table right now is essentially what I'm going to call comprehensive plan help. So it's going to be, a funding opportunity, but really the scoping is what's happening right now. So we're kind of refining scope. Our staff and Councilmember Corr kind of looking at that as a topic. A little bit more about it and why it's important to the city of Kent, this partnership on a regional level. We're a small, lean city team here. We need others. A few years ago, we talked about at the council retreat, our strength is going to be in partnerships in the region. We need to tell our story. And that's really what K4C can do for us. So K4C at the county and at the state level lobbied for and came up with some pretty innovative policies and programs. The first one is, and I might lean on you a little bit again, Councilmember Corr, is the C-PACER program. And it's a loan program is the best way to think about it, where they're below market rates available to properties, I'll say it that way, kind of medium-sized residential and commercial properties to make investments to lower their greenhouse gas emissions. So there isn't a mandate other than the 2050 goal that we talked about in the beginning here. The cool thing about the program, though, is it's not a conventional loan program. It's actually, it's a lien, essentially. They're 20 to 25-year notes, but it's a lien on the property. So there's an actual encumbrance on title that if a property owner were to sell, the next owner then inherits, if you will, that debt service. It's pretty cheap money to make improvements in a facility to lower the gas emissions from that product. The state has a similar program. It's called I have to refer to my notes, Commercial Building Performance Standard. That one is a little different in that it's a regulation. It's a commitment to meeting a standard by the year 2026, and it's a bit of a longer runway. It targets larger commercial buildings because they're the second highest generator of carbon gas, so of the pollutant gas, behind transportation. That one is great because while it is a mandate to meet a target, until 2026, so from this January to 2026, businesses have the opportunity to apply for early adopter incentives is what it's called, but it's basically a cents per square foot of their facility for basically free money to invest in innovations to modernize their energy efficiency. So great program. We at the city can do a lot more to kind of champion those and publicize those. We're going to be doing that in my department as development comes through the door, and we can talk to folks. Frankly, I don't know if it's available for city facilities. I'm thinking about what Julie just said there for senior center and other things. It might be something that we could look at, but I'll look to Councilmember Corr with that one. All right, so as we discussed, more plans, policies, and goals for our community originate where? The comprehensive plan. So many of the foundational policies that we have in the comprehensive plan, they're supportive of climate change mitigation, adaptation, because concepts like, you guys are all familiar with these phrases, compact growth or pedestrian orientation or bicycle connectivity, they all directly reduce greenhouse gas emissions related to transportation. Again, transportation is the #1 category for greenhouse gas emissions. Commercial buildings are closely followed, but the #2 category. The policies don't mention climate change specifically, but as you can see in there, the utilities element, Chad will talk about it a bunch more here in a moment, it addresses it more directly in the narrative. So, Julie mentioned lots of them out of the parks element. You already know the stuff out of my department. The land use element has multiple, but by far and away, the comprehensive plan element that has the most kind of reference, if you will, to climate, it's going to be the utilities section. And it's a pretty straight line, direct relationship. You guys will get that. Chad will cover a lot of that. I'm not going to dwell on that one. So I'm going to move us on to a little bit closer to home. So the comprehensive plan, out of that comes all of our adopted regulations citywide. So whether it's the private investment that my department mainly deals with, or whether it's, Chad or Julie out there doing city projects, they'll need to comply with our adopted regulations, right? So everybody's got to play on the same board game here. So climate matters have been incorporated into most of our applicable development regulations. Over the last 20 years, they've been ramping up steadily. Year after year, they get a little bit more strict. We administer those on a daily basis. There are the obvious ones, like designing and building to our modern energy codes, or the more nuanced ones, like the land use or transportation ones that we've mentioned that encourage, compact, environmentally friendly infrastructure, and kind of the multimodal development pattern. The larger and more the larger, more complicated developments, the same goes for the regulations that they're going to be exposed to. So the State Environmental Policy Act, or SIPA, the SIPA checklist will be submitted for a big project. It's going to address a proposal's impacts across broad environmental categories like air, water, soil, plants. The intent there, of course, is compliance with our regulations on the books to minimize a proposal's negative impacts to the environment. So I want to get a little bit more specific in these because, complying with regulations, how does that really make sense to the climate? Lots of our programs, Julie rattled off 10, 20 plans that came out of the parks element in the comprehensive plan. The same goes for Chad's group and the utilities group, or frankly, the housing group, or, any one of our comprehensive plan elements will have kind of embedded programs that you guys are familiar with. Tree retention program, the critical areas ordinance. I mean, these are all adopted pieces of code that are all kind of housed in that document. So I'm going to zero in now a little bit more on my department level stuff. So we're kind of zooming in. The programs and initiatives that have proven to have kind of the most, I'll just say, dramatic or positive impacts on climate are fairly new and eye-watering. It's impressive. Our traditional permitting model, you guys all are familiar with the permit center across the hall or across the street here. The very design, the deliberate design of that facility is a giant counter where people could bring reams of paper and submit them into our development review process. So that has been the way for 20 plus years that I've been here. We kind of jump-started our foray into online permitting, not really by choice, but by pandemic. And with that came we quickly realized the impact that something like that would have on savings or climate or environmental sustainability measures. So we did some quick kind of napkin math on this one. In 2021, we estimated over 1 million sheets of paper were saved, or the equivalent of 221 trees, just from the permitting flip in my office. So that's not IT, that's not law, it's not Chad's team, it's not parks, that's just from the permit center counter. So again, things that we're doing, it's not really a code adaptation or anything like that, it's a matter of how we do our work today. Another great example, a bit of a surprise to me was, as soon as I got those stats, I was wondering about the remote work status. So this one's, it's got to have a little asterisk next to it because remote work is what we're doing right now in response to a global pandemic. Is it here tomorrow? I don't know. Is it going to be some semblance of this? Yeah, probably. To what extent, I'm not sure. But just some of the stats that we have, I have a fairly small or medium-sized department. We're about 50 employees in ECD. So the staff that I have, just the department alone, you're probably way ahead of me and I've already read this, but we've removed 101 vehicle trips per week, 3,000 vehicle miles traveled per week. That's 600 gallons of fuel per month, $2,000 a month in fuel savings just for my staff in ECD alone. This reduction in trips to the office, just from my staff, round trip, that's 2,000 pounds of CO2 per week removed from the normal course. So I'm going to wrap this up just to kind of keep the team going, but I guess I want to just throw out there the concept of, that's ECD. I'm a medium-sized department. If you look at it across the city, or frankly, if you look at just the customers that come into our permit center, that don't come in anymore, they do it all online. That's at least one round trip to submit a permit, one round trip to pick up a permit, and love my process, but there's typically some revisions in between those two steps. So there's quite a few trips that are happening, or that would have happened, but for this remote status. So it is a staggeringly impressive number that we're taking trips off the road and the greenhouse gas emissions. It's amazing. So with that, Mr. Bieren.
Thanks, Kurt. Good evening, Council, Council President, and Mayor. I think you've gotten kind of a timber that there's a little bit of work that gets done with each department, and we definitely communicate and dovetail together to make sure everything's working in unison. As Kurt said, obviously there's a lot of the planning that goes on in the planning department. Parks does a lot of its own planning and implementation, and in Public Works, we end up doing a lot of just the implementation. And the biggest thing, single thing, that I wanted to cover during the discussion is, how are we responding to climate change? We can plan for it. We can think about, okay, how are we going to respond and make changes? And our biggest thing, obviously, and we've talked about it for years, is the levees. Because one of the biggest results of climate change that we've experienced is intense storms and more intense flows in the Green River. So that's why when we look at our levee projects, we actually have to look at our salmon habitat, our recreation, and then how are we going to deal with the flows themselves. Lower Russell Road, which will be done this year, I think is a good example where we've gone and we're meeting the 500-year standard, flood protection standard, which means we're really going to be resilient and be able to move forward with any of the storms that we see coming. Obviously, we'll have improvements that we could discuss later on at the dam, but the things that we can control are the levees themselves. So this is a great example of where we're combining our recreation habitat and then the flood control. Picture of the existing facility. We've got a lot of the habitat area in here is for back channel for fish. We also have flood conveyance capacity in the main channel of the river. We'll be doing similar projects at Signature Point Levee in the coming years, and then Milwaukee 2 Levee located on the south end of town. So really focused on those levees and making sure that the valley itself is in good shape. And again, in the planning phase, looking at how all these things affect habitat. And I've got the picture up here of the habitat plan, salmon habitat plan, but obviously this also affects our stormwater utility, sewer utility, and the water utility, as Kurt mentioned earlier. Those all wrap into the comprehensive plan. But when you look at, for instance, the water utility, we've planned ahead for decades on water supply and making sure that our water supply is safe and effective. And then ultimately, year in and year out, we make sure we're ready for whatever gets thrown at us. We train for flood prep with our operations crews and make sure that they're ready to go just in case we're surprised. Now, we haven't had flooding from the Green River in decades, thanks to the dam, and we don't foresee it. However, again, we don't know what climate change is necessarily going to throw at us, so we have to prepare. A lot of this all comes back down to education and communication with the public as well, and it's change everybody needs to make in their daily lives. So making sure that people think about clean water, using less water, as Julie mentioned earlier, all those proposals that we have within the Parks Department, those are things we want everybody in the city to do. Water conservation, recycling, waste management. Part of that is obviously the Planet Protector Summit that we have annually. We've been doing that for over 20 years now. Fifth graders have been learning for years on what you should and shouldn't do, and then taking that to their families and helping them understand what is kind of state of the art with regard to how you protect the planet. This also includes communicating to everybody in the community so that we're able to get out and make sure we get the word that everybody can understand. We've talked more recently about fleet and changes in our fleet. We are now ordering our first fully electric vehicles that are going to be used here at City Hall. Are installing, as Julie mentioned earlier, we're going to be installing electric vehicle charging stations at City Hall. City owns 2 stations over on First that were part of a grant that we received several years back. So those are available to the public, but these will be specific for the fleet vehicles. We've looked at all electric vehicles over the years as a cost only consideration. They're very expensive. And so we don't put a lot of miles on our vehicles, and we're going through right now a pretty rigorous analysis to see what makes sense. Obviously, there's the greenhouse gas portion of it, and what do we want to do the right thing. However, given the amount of gas we would save versus the amount of money we'd spend, we would need to take a really close look at it and say, okay, is this really right for the city? For instance, do we want to go to a fully electric police fleet? At some point that might make sense, but the first cost to get there is very expensive. We also, Dave Brock, I think, talked in our Public Works Committee meeting recently about hybrid vehicles, and those are a lot more cost effective for us. And then some vehicles on the right, they're not yet available in hybrid form. Fleet also spends a lot of time recycling everything we can. So that actually helps out in a huge reduction with emissions on the end. Same with warehouse, signs, latex paint, auto batteries, spare parts, metals. Again, if you don't have to extract all those things and refine them, it's a lot easier. And then just litter removal. A lot of the microplastics that you've heard about in the news more recently, we don't want that in the water courses. Mike McTudis mentioned recently in Public Works Committee that there are preservatives that are used in tires that they've found just in the last couple of years are one of the main issues with regard to death rates for coho salmon in our streams. And we're going to see a significant increase in regulation in many of those areas. So keeping this stuff out of the stream to begin with is a big deal. Been about 5 years ago now, 6 years ago, that we converted from old HPS or high pressure sodium lights to LED lights throughout the city. Those are the city-owned street lights. So we have just shy of 3,000 of those that were replaced with LED, and we've been saving money on those since I think it was 2016 when we went through that conversion. Street trees, and that's part of our standard. Street standard now has been for years, but we had included that in the 2021 standards, putting in street trees in the majority of our new installations. We also look for opportunities to install street trees throughout the city. And then, again, more recently, discussion on pollinator flower patches. So Jen Harrell, who presented at the Public Works Committee, they're going in right now. And then a conversation I had several months back with Councilmember Fincher about product I had not heard about. And Hunter Jin in our operations group has done a lot of research into, they actually are paving, some streets are getting painted. Other streets, they're using an emulsifier in the asphalt that's a different color than your typical black asphalt in Los Angeles and Phoenix. And right now, we're kind of in the wait and see phase. We've got some feedback from both cities. There's a big variation in the cost, the first cost to put it in. And then we heard from the folks in Los Angeles that the pavements get dirty pretty fast and starts looking not so great. And then you get a reduced benefit of the reflectivity. So something we're looking into to help with the heat island effect of all the streets soaking up a lot of heat during the day and then giving that off into the evening. Also looked into potential for using different kinds of plastic resin in asphalt, which is another emerging technology. And we need to hold on that one a little bit and make sure that the resins coming back out of those asphalts aren't anything that we want to have to deal with in the future. With that, I'll hand it back to Derek.
All right, thanks, Chad. So putting together this presentation has been a very valuable exercise because I think we realize that we're actually doing a lot on climate and sustainability. We just haven't really thought of it in a comprehensive way. And so no matter what direction we go on staffing, I think there's more opportunity to tell a story here. So speaking of staffing, here are just a few options that I'd like to tee up in advance of your retreat on Friday. The first one would be to continue to coordinate on projects and operational issues as needed. That's what we're doing right now, so that it would be a status quo level of coordination. It would have obviously a low budget impact because that is what we're doing right now. If we wanted to step that up a bit, we could create a formal interdepartmental committee of city administration, Parks and Rec, Public Works, and ECD. That could offer some enhanced coordination while still maintaining a fairly low budget impact. Would have some staff time impact because staff would be participating in those meetings on a regular basis. To step it up again, the council could add a position to the next biennial budget. Our council retreat facilitator interviewed all of you individually to get your thoughts on agenda topics. One of the ideas that came out of that was at least a half-time position working on climate issues. That would provide the highest level of coordination of these options here, but conversely would have the largest budget impact because we would have to provide salary and benefits for that position, as well as office space, training, and other things that we normally provide positions. And as we'll talk about on Friday, we're headed into a tight 2-year budget cycle, so finding the dollars to do that could be a little bit challenging. Another issue that we need to think about is the home department for a climate position. It could be in any one of those departments listed in the second bullet up there. City administration seems like a logical place. I mean, that's where we've put the equity program. But to be completely transparent with the council, I think our bandwidth to take on another position in terms of my supervisory time as well as even office space could be an issue there. The challenge with putting it in a department would be that it's a coordination role, and so that person would in some ways be above the other departments, but still equal on the organizational chart. So there's no perfect option there. That's just something that we would have to work through. And then just a couple of other considerations that we should talk through further at the retreat. Recent public comment around climate issues has included calls for a climate action plan, greenhouse gas inventory, a web page, and the like. And then staff training, kind of like our equity program. If we wanted to step it up on climate issues, we would probably need to fund some staff training. So it's also, I think Kurt touched on this as well, that we may end up doing some of this anyway. We already have a number of climate requirements in the comprehensive plan process, and it's entirely possible coming out of this legislative session that there will be a requirement that our next comprehensive plan include a climate element. So that means we would need to do that either with existing staff, new staff, setting aside funds in the budget for one-time work on those strategic plans and inventories. And as Kurt mentioned, there are grant opportunities out there as well, and we certainly advocate that as the legislature puts more expectations on cities, that the legislature would provide some funding options for us as well. So my suggestion to the council, we have some time on the Friday afternoon of the retreat this Friday. So the next few days would be an opportunity to go through some of these slides in a little more detail. There was a lot of information there. Ask questions. Paula Painter, our finance director, will be talking through our next 2-year budget Friday morning. That will provide some useful context. Whoops. And then, oh boy, I really did it this time. There we go. And then we can get into some direction to staff at that point. But today we're here and happy to answer any questions that come to mind this evening, and happy to do a little more research between now and Friday.
Okay, thank you, Derek and team. Good presentation. Council member, any questions and thoughts for Derek? Councilmember Fincher.
I had a question actually for Julie. Julie, you had down Q1 of 2023 for the education and public engagement. Was that just starting from square one then, or are you getting the groups, the questions, all of the front work done before pulling people in?
Yeah, I think where we can, we're going to explore what we can do in the existing budget, but with budget, reductions, it's very difficult to introduce an entire new program area. And so we were looking at trying to phase that in as we phase out of some other stuff. So it's kind of a whole kind of approach as we move forward. But we've talked about a few different things, like for instance, when Panther Lake, the Hughes property gets developed, that'd be a great place for a nature-based program. So there's a lot of things that we want to do in our current parks. It's just capacity to do so. So we were looking at, obviously, 22 is another tough year for us because we're still not out of COVID, so we're still seeing declining participation and concern by people wanting to be engaged. So we thought it'd be probably better to start that in 23. It's just really strategy on timing.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Hey, great presentation. I really like what you guys have said. There, one thing you can think about too, that may not cost any money, it's just how you shape the culture of the organization. To just start think about their day-to-day work and what they see, a suggestion box on what we can do. I mean, I think those are things, immediate things you probably could do, and that probably could have a huge impact. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, training, if we wanted to do some of that, in, big budget terms, is a relatively inexpensive thing and can be part of culture as well. So I think it's a good suggestion.
Well, great. I know this is on our agenda for, is it ceremony? This
is scheduled for Friday afternoon.
Friday afternoon. Okay, Friday afternoon. So we'll definitely would have more dialogue. This is a great teaser for us, right? So definitely look forward to a more in-depth conversation. So, council member, bring your questions and thoughts and recommendation, and then we'll pick this up on Friday afternoon. With that said, I have no more questions. That was our only presentation. So we're going to recess until the council meeting. Once again, Dream Team, thank you. Appreciate it.